David Goggins is, for many, an almost mythical figure of modern human endurance, but his story begins in extremely real and painful circumstances, marked by abandonment, racism, domestic violence, and economic hardship. From a very young age, Goggins faced a hostile family environment where fear, insecurity, and a constant sense of inadequacy shaped a personality that, at first glance, might have seemed fragile or doomed to failure. However, it is precisely within this context that the foundation of what would later become his trademark was built, an almost superhuman capacity to face suffering, push beyond limits, and transform pain into fuel for extraordinary achievements. Throughout this first block, it is essential to understand that Goggins is not just an elite athlete or a former Navy SEAL. He is a living example of how traumatic experiences, when confronted consciously and with determination, can be converted into mental strength and physical resilience. His childhood was marked by constant changes of school, relentless bullying, and a continuous sense of displacement, elements that created not only traumas, but also a wound that he would learn to use as a catalyst for personal transformation. The opening narrative must capture this duality, suffering and potential, pain and growth, fear and action, so that the viewer understands that Goggins's journey did not begin at the top, but from the very bottom. Here lies the first fundamental lesson. Adversity, no matter how cruel, carries within it the seeds of overcoming, and the way one deals with these seeds determines the scope of their inner power. Furthermore, this introduction serves to contextualize the audience for what is to come. Stories of ultra-marathons, military challenges, extreme records, and moments when Goggins confronted not only the external world, but above all, the internal limits that each of us carries. The script must emphasize every detail of his early journey, exploring the moments of loneliness, despair, and frustration that paradoxically became the very engines of the strength he demonstrates today. In this way, the audience is led into a full immersion into Goggins's psychology, understanding that behind each excruciating workout, each test of endurance, and each motivational mantra lies a story of suffering that was transformed into extreme resilience, establishing the foundation for all the lessons that will be explored in later blocks. The narrative must be dense, cinematic, and detailed, transmitting every nuance of Goggins's early experiences, so the audience does not merely know the facts, but feels the weight of each difficulty that shaped his mindset, preparing them to grasp the depth of the brutal self-discipline that defines his life today. At the core of David Goggins's philosophy lies the premise that pain is not only inevitable, but also essential for true human growth. He rejects the idea of comfort as the path to personal fulfillment, and asserts with almost brutal intensity that overcoming is born from deliberately facing suffering. For Goggins, each physical or mental challenge is an opportunity to expand the limits of one's existence, to develop a resilience that transcends the body and fortifies the mind. This block must dive deeply into the logic behind this approach, showing how he views discomfort as a silent teacher that teaches, shapes, and transforms those willing to listen and act in response. The narrative must detail examples from his own life, ultra-marathons in unforgiving deserts, military endurance tests of extreme rigor, long training sessions under adverse conditions, sleep deprivation, and lack of food, all used as personal laboratories to test and expand his limits. It is essential to explore the psychological dimension of this philosophy, revealing how Goggins not only endures pain, but actively seeks it, creates situations of discomfort, and confronts suffering head-on, always looking for lessons within it. Furthermore, the script must connect this philosophy with universal concepts of overcoming. Suffering is not a punishment, but a tool. Pain is not an obstacle, but a bridge. And fear, when confronted, is transformed into energy for action and focus. The narrative must highlight concrete moments of his life, such as 12-hour training sessions in extreme climates, ultra-distance races that push the boundaries of human physiology, and psychological endurance drills, all demonstrating that Goggins's philosophy is not theory, but absolute relentless practice. Each experience of pain endured is presented as a conscious choice, an opportunity to strengthen the body, harden the mind, and test perceived limits. This block must create a sense of immersion, making the viewer realize that Goggins's philosophy is at once simple and devastating in its effectiveness. Simple because anyone can apply the principle of facing pain and discomfort. Devastating because it demands courage, discipline, and willpower far beyond the ordinary. Finally, the narrative must emphasize that this radical approach to suffering is the foundation of all of Goggins's teachings, establishing the mental pattern that adversity is inevitable, discomfort is necessary, and overcoming is a direct consequence of actively confronting what most people avoid, preparing the audience for the concepts of self-discipline and mental resilience that will follow. David Goggins makes it clear that motivation is fleeting, temporary, and often misleading. It arises in moments of excitement and disappears at the first obstacle. The true differentiator, according to him, is extreme self-discipline, the ability to act even when the body begs for rest. The mind insists on quitting, and all circumstances seem to conspire against you. This block must explore in detail how Goggins built a life routine based on unshakable principles of discipline, extending far beyond physical training, encompassing daily habits, mindset, and consistent behavior in any situation. The audience must understand that for Goggins, each day is a test of commitment. Each choice between ease and effort defines who he becomes. He trains for hours every single day, undergoes brutal physical exercises, runs ultra-distance races, engages in endurance sessions in extreme heat or freezing cold, and combines it all with mental resistance practices, visualization, and constant self-questioning, creating a continuous cycle of improvement that challenges conventional notions of human limits. The script must provide specific examples: waking before dawn for excruciating training sessions, fulfilling physical goals even amid pain or exhaustion, and maintaining habits that most would consider impossible or unsustainable. Each action is carried out with clear intention, not as a display of strength but as a tool for mental fortification, demonstrating that self-discipline is the foundation of any consistent achievement. Moreover, this block must link discipline to personal transformation. The daily repetition of challenging actions builds endurance, develops courage, and creates an internal confidence that does not depend on external circumstances or fleeting inspiration. The narrative must emphasize that Goggins understands the human mind, naturally seeks comfort, avoids suffering, and looks for easier paths. His radical philosophy consists of reversing this pattern, transforming discomfort into habit, pain into learning, and consistent action into tangible results. By exploring brutal self-discipline, the audience is led to reflect on their own perceived limitations, understanding that the difference between what is possible and what is imagined is directly tied to the willingness to apply absolute discipline every day, even when everything inside tells you to stop, quit, or delay. Finally, this block must clearly establish the connection between discipline and inner freedom. The more one masters their actions, routine, and response to pain, the more controlled and powerful their life becomes, creating the perfect ground for Goggins's next teachings, such as building mental calluses and confronting self-imposed limits. One of the central ideas in David Goggins's methodology is the concept of callousing the mind. Just as the skin develops physical calluses to protect itself from friction and pain, Goggins proposes that the mind must be deliberately exposed to challenges, adversities, and constant discomforts in order to become resilient, impenetrable, and capable of withstanding pressures that for most people would be unbearable. This block must dive deeply into the mechanics of this concept, showing that it is not simply about ignoring pain or difficulty, but actively seeking them out, structuring experiences that test mental strength to its limits and promote lasting growth. The narrative needs to explore concrete examples from Goggins's life: ultra-distance runs of hundreds of kilometers, military trials requiring extreme physical and psychological endurance, training sessions in freezing cold or scorching heat, sleep deprivation, restricted diet, and moments of total exhaustion in which he forced himself to continue even when his body begged to stop. Each of these experiences functions as a stimulus for the mind, creating what he calls mental calluses, areas of consciousness hardened by repeated exposure to adversity, able to withstand crises, pressures, and future challenges with greater clarity and determination. In addition, the script must detail how Goggins applies this philosophy on a micro scale in daily life, waking earlier than necessary, facing physical routines that test personal limits, taking on tasks that provoke emotional or social discomfort, and maintaining strict commitments to himself even without external supervision or encouragement. The narrative emphasizes that mental callousing is not an isolated goal, but a practical tool for overcoming self-imposed limits, reducing vulnerability to pain, and increasing tolerance to situations that intimidate most people. This block must also address the psychological and neuroscientific dimension of this practice. Repeated exposure to discomfort activates adaptive responses in the brain, strengthens resilience circuits, increases the perception of control, and reduces the tendency to avoid challenges, creating a mindset of continuous and assertive action. The way the script presents callousing the mind must be detailed, almost tangible to the viewer, conveying not only the theory, but also the sensory and emotional experience of the process, the deep fatigue, the desire to quit, the fear and tension, followed by the clarity, focus, and sense of power that emerge from conscious confrontation. By the end of this block, the audience must understand that mental hardening is not optional for those who seek extreme excellence. It is a requirement, a daily commitment to personal growth and to overcoming physical and psychological limitations that shape the essence of David Goggins' life. David Goggins states emphatically that the greatest enemy of any person is not in the external world, but within themselves. Self-imposed limits, limiting beliefs, and psychological barriers shape what we believe to be possible or impossible, often long before any real test of endurance. This block must explore in detail how Goggins identifies, challenges, and destroys these internal barriers, using concrete examples from his life and from his extreme training sessions, where the true obstacle was not the environment or circumstances, but his own mind questioning the ability to continue. The narrative must depict ultra-distance runs, military endurance tests, Ironman events, and extreme deprivation challenges that for any ordinary person would be impossible. Yet Goggins applies rigorous psychological techniques to reprogram his mind: intense visualization, motivational self-talk, breaking the challenge into manageable steps, and a discipline of constant self-questioning, forcing the mind to expand its perception of limits. Moreover, the script must highlight that confronting self-imposed limits is not only about physical performance, but also about emotional and psychological endurance. Each moment of fatigue, pain, fear, or doubt is treated as an opportunity to test mental strength and reinforce the conviction that we are capable of far more than we think. The narrative must dive into Goggins' internal processes, detailing how he transforms thoughts of quitting into action, how he perceives every "I can't" as a growth point, and how these experiences shape a mindset capable of facing any adversity. It is fundamental for the viewer to understand that confronting self-imposed limits is a daily, continuous exercise requiring brutal honesty with oneself and the courage to face physical and emotional discomforts that would normally be avoided. Each story or example presented must transmit the intensity of this process, the exhaustion, the pressure, the fear, the inner struggle, and finally, the silent victory over one's own mind, demonstrating that true freedom and real resilience are born from mastering perceived limitations. Finally, this block establishes the bridge between mental callousing and Goggins' philosophy of "don't be weak." By confronting and overcoming self-imposed limits, the individual begins to experience an unshakable inner strength, capable of sustaining any subsequent challenge and preparing the ground for the central mantra that defines his life and teachings. At the core of David Goggins' philosophy is the mantra he repeats incessantly: "Don't be weak." This simple yet powerful phrase functions as a constant warning against complacency, self-pity, and surrender to difficulties. The block must detail how Goggins transforms this mentality into daily practice, showing that it is not about arrogance or contempt for others, but about a deep commitment to himself to face every challenge, pain, or discomfort without giving in. Every episode of his life, from his childhood marked by trauma and bullying to his feats as a Navy SEAL and ultramarathoner, is permeated by this mental posture: the refusal to accept weakness, the pursuit of facing situations most would avoid, and the determination to move forward when both mind and body beg to quit. The script must explore concrete examples, such as training sessions that last over 12 hours, races of hundreds of kilometers in extreme conditions, and physical and psychological endurance tests that challenge human limits. Moreover, it is essential to show that this mentality does not arise from a momentary impulse, but from continuous construction. Strict habits, extreme discipline, deliberate exposure to pain, and constant self-assessment, all designed to reinforce mental and emotional strength. This block must also emphasize the psychological aspect of the philosophy. Don't be weak is above all a reminder that the mind tends to seek comfort and avoid pain, and that true strength arises when one consciously decides to face what intimidates, even when everything inside screams to stop. The script must convey the intensity of this practice, making the viewer feel the urgency, tension, and determination that define each of Goggins's choices. Each narrative and example must illustrate that weakness is not only physical, but also mental, emotional, and moral, and that confronting it daily is what separates those who achieve excellence from those who remain in the comfort zone. Finally, this block establishes the foundation for understanding Goggins's most extreme methods, including building mental calluses, brutal self-discipline, and overcoming self-imposed limits, showing that "don't be weak" is more than a slogan. It is a lifestyle, a practical philosophy that transforms suffering into strength and challenges into continuous growth. One of the most emblematic aspects of David Goggins's journey is his immersion in ultramarathons and extreme endurance events, which function as living laboratories for his life philosophy. This block must explore in detail how Goggins uses these races not only as competition, but as tools to test and expand his physical and mental limits, turning each kilometer into a deep study of pain, exhaustion, and resilience. Unlike ordinary athletes who seek victories or prizes, for Goggins the real challenge lies in facing continuous suffering. 100, 160, or even more than 200-kilometer races in severe weather conditions, hostile terrains, and with minimal resources. Each ultramarathon is presented as an experience of confrontation with the mind itself, where thoughts of quitting constantly arise, attempt to convince the body to surrender, and challenge the discipline built over years. The script must dive into the details of Goggins's physical and mental preparation, grueling daily training, sleep deprivation, strict control of diet, simulation of adverse conditions, and intense visualization of every stage of the race, showing that success is not merely the result of physical effort, but of a sophisticated psychological strategy of self-overcoming. Furthermore, it is essential to highlight the critical moments of the races, points where pain becomes almost unbearable, cramps set in, extreme exhaustion and disorientation threaten continuation. Yet Goggins's trained mind acts as the decisive factor, allowing him to move forward when most would quit. This block must also explain how these experiences shape character, strengthen determination, and demonstrate in palpable ways Goggins's central philosophy: to face suffering, create mental calluses, and expand the limits of what is possible. The audience must feel the intensity of each step, the tension of the internal battle between quitting and persevering, and the clarity that arises when perceived limits are surpassed, revealing that ultramarathons are more than physical competitions. They are rituals of mental transformation, tests of inner strength, and living evidence that human beings are capable of enduring and conquering far more than imagined. By the end of this block, the viewer must understand that every kilometer run by Goggins is a lesson in courage, discipline, and resilience, setting the perfect stage to explore the techniques and strategies he developed to deal with pain, motivate himself, and inspire others to face their own limits. David Goggins's journey as a Navy SEAL represents a convergence point between physical endurance, mental strength, and extreme discipline, serving as a concrete example of the practical application of his resilience principles. This block must detail how military training, recognized worldwide for its severity, served as the ultimate testing ground for Goggins' philosophy, demanding not only physical aptitude, but an almost unbreakable mental strength. The script must explore the intensity of WBUD-S, basic underwater demolition or SEAL training, highlighting how endurance trials, exercises in hostile environments, extreme sleep deprivation, prolonged exposure to cold and heat, as well as physically exhausting tasks, were transformed by Goggins into opportunities to create mental calluses and expand his capacity to endure suffering. The narrative must dive into the psychological processes involved. While the body approached collapse, The mind was trained to maintain absolute focus, discipline, and decision-making ability under pressure, turning each moment of pain into learning and growth. Furthermore, the script must emphasize that Goggins' success was not based solely on physical strength, but on the ability to master fear, exhaustion, and self-pity, applying techniques of visualization, breathing control, repetition of internal mantras, and mental endurance. Every test, every weighted run, every dive in freezing waters, every day of sleep and food deprivation became a systematic test to break self-imposed limits, strengthen the mind, and consolidate the brutal self-discipline that defines his life. This block must also highlight the strategic dimension of the training. Goggins learned to break monumental challenges into manageable steps, maintain absolute concentration even under intense stress, and transform suffering into continuous motivation. This process not only prepared Goggins for high-risk military operations, but also cemented his life philosophy, showing that extreme mental strength does not arise from comfort, but from constant and deliberate exposure to adversity, whether in the training field or in daily life. By presenting this stage, the script must convey a sense of absolute intensity, making the viewer feel the psychological and physical pressure endured, understanding that the SEAL experience was a catalyst that solidified all the tools he uses today to inspire and challenge anyone to surpass their own limits. For David Goggins, pain is not an obstacle to be avoided, but a tool to be used, an instrument that, when understood and embraced, transforms into strength, resilience, and personal growth. This block must explore deeply how Goggins reconfigures the perception of pain. He deliberately faces it, identifies its sources, whether physical, emotional, or mental, and uses each painful experience as fuel for expanding human capacity. The narrative must detail extreme examples from his life, training sessions that provoke intense cramps, ultra-distance races in hostile terrains, sleep deprivation and minimal food intake, military experiences, and self-imposed challenges that test psychological limits. In each scenario, pain is described not merely as suffering, but as an opportunity to create mental calluses, strengthen the mind, and prepare body and spirit for even greater challenges. The script must show Goggins' specific methodology for facing pain, maintaining absolute focus on the goal, breaking suffering into small, manageable stages, using motivational self-talk, and visualizing the final result with emotional intensity. This process transforms fear and aversion to pain into determination and inner power, demonstrating that true strength does not come from the absence of suffering, but from the ability to cross it consciously and without surrender. Furthermore, it is crucial to explain that pain, when confronted repeatedly, changes the perception of limits. What once seemed unbearable becomes tolerable, and experiences that once intimidated are now seen as opportunities for continuous growth. The narrative must emphasize the emotional dimension of this process, showing that Goggins not only endures physical pain, but also confronts past traumas, personal frustrations, and psychological challenges with the same intensity and discipline. Each example must allow the viewer to understand that transforming pain into power is not magic, but the result of deliberate practice, systematic exposure to suffering, and the development of a resilient mindset that refuses weakness. Finally, this block must establish a direct connection with previous concepts. Self-discipline, mental calluses, and confronting self-imposed limits converge in Goggins' philosophy, showing that pain, when accepted and correctly used, is the most powerful fuel to reach the maximum potential of the human body and mind. David Goggins emphasizes that extreme progress, the building of resilience and personal transformation do not arise solely from effort and discipline, but also from meticulous record-keeping and constant self-evaluation. This block must detail how he documents every workout, challenge, and moment of suffering, transforming data, metrics, and experiences into tools for understanding his limits, identifying areas of improvement, and driving continuous growth. Goggins keeps detailed logs of runs, workouts, nutrition, sleep, race times, and repetitions, but not merely as statistics. He uses this information to analyze behavior patterns, physical reactions, and psychological responses to each difficulty. The script must explore how this practice turns seemingly chaotic experiences into structured knowledge, Each failure, each partial withdrawal, each moment of extreme exhaustion becomes a lesson, an opportunity to learn about his own mind and body, and a way to strengthen discipline for future challenges. Moreover, it is essential to show that Goggins's self-evaluation is not limited to physical aspects. He analyzes emotions, thoughts, mental triggers, fears, and perceived weaknesses, confronting honestly all areas that could limit performance or growth. The narrative must detail examples from his daily life. After ultramarathons or intense training sessions, he revisits records, evaluates decisions, measures progress against previous goals, identifies behaviors that must be modified, and adjusts strategies based on concrete data. This process creates a continuous cycle of self-improvement, allowing him to know himself deeply and transform every challenge into tangible learning. The script must emphasize that the practice of recording and evaluation is not just a monitoring method, but a critical component of Goggins' mindset. Full awareness of oneself, of limits, and of results strengthens self-discipline, increases resilience, and ensures that suffering and effort are not wasted but converted into real, measurable growth. Finally, this block must connect self-evaluation with previous concepts, showing that mental hardening, confronting limits, transforming pain into power, and extreme discipline are all enhanced when accompanied by precise records, continuous analysis, and radical honesty with oneself, creating the foundation for constant evolution and the achievement of feats many would consider impossible. One of the central pillars of David Goggins' methodology is detailed visualization and mental preparation, processes that allow him to anticipate challenges, master fear, and maximize performance in any extreme situation. This block must explore how Goggins uses the mind as a powerful ally, transforming each event, training, or race into a complete mental rehearsal where every obstacle, every moment of pain, and every possible decision is anticipated and practiced before being faced physically. The narrative must detail that visualization is not an abstract or casual exercise. It is a rigorous, continuous, and structured process in which Goggins imagines scenarios of extreme exhaustion, physical collapse, climatic adversities, potential failures, and moments of defeat, and mentally trains his responses, strengthening the resilience, patience, and discipline necessary to persevere. Additionally, the script must highlight the connection between visualization and emotional control. By mentally anticipating each challenge, Goggins reduces anxiety, transforms fear into focus, and creates unshakable confidence in his ability to continue even under intense suffering. It is essential that the audience understands how this practice works in real life. During ultra-distance races, military trials, or extreme endurance exercises, the mind has already walked through all possible paths, rehearsed every movement, every reaction to pain, and every strategic adjustment, allowing the body to perform efficiently while willpower is constantly fueled by predictability and psychological preparation. The script must include examples of how he combines visualization with physical discipline, repetitive training, incremental challenges, and planned extreme situations, all accompanied by rigorous mental anticipation, creating a continuous cycle of simulation and execution where the mind is never caught off guard and every obstacle becomes an additional training point. Furthermore, this block must show that mental preparation goes beyond physical performance, encompassing personal, emotional, and professional life. Goggins applies the same mental rigor to confront past traumas, accumulated frustrations, and unexpected adversities, demonstrating that mental strength is built both in anticipation and in direct experience. Finally, this segment reinforces that visualization, when combined with extreme discipline, self-evaluation, and facing pain, is the engine that allows David Goggins to challenge seemingly impossible human limits, consolidating the idea that mental preparation is not optional, but essential for anyone seeking extraordinary results and the transformation of suffering into power. For David Goggins, consistent discipline is the driving force that sustains his entire philosophy of resilience and extreme overcoming. This block must dive into the concept of discipline not as fleeting motivation or momentary impulse, but as a daily, systematic, and non-negotiable commitment to personal evolution. The script must explore how Goggins structures his routine meticulously. Rigorous physical training, controlled sleep schedules, planned nutrition, moments of introspection, and constant goal review, all integrated into a pattern of habits that do not depend on temporary willpower, but on character building and mental strength. It is essential to show that discipline is the mechanism that allows one to face pain, surpass limits, and transform every challenge into opportunity, even when motivation fails or comfort tries to seduce. The block must detail clear examples from his daily life, waking before dawn for long training sessions, completing exercises in adverse conditions, running extra miles when the body begs for rest, and persisting in seemingly impossible goals, all sustained by consistency and repetition. Furthermore, the script must emphasize the psychological dimension. Consistent discipline creates inner confidence, reduces dependence on external factors, and transforms the mind into a powerful ally, capable of carrying a person through situations of extreme physical and emotional suffering. This segment must also connect discipline with previous blocks, showing how meticulous record-keeping, detailed visualization, and facing pain are enhanced when integrated into a continuous disciplinary practice. The audience must feel that discipline is not arbitrary sacrifice, but a conscious path to strengthening mind and body, capable of redefining what is possible for any individual. Finally, this block reinforces that Goggins's discipline is not an isolated routine, but a lifestyle, a constant practice that shapes habits, decisions, and mindset, consolidating the idea that true overcoming is born from rigorous repetition, unwavering commitment, and daily dedication, transforming ordinary efforts into extraordinary achievements and preparing the ground for facing even greater challenges, both physical and psychological. One of the central principles of David Goggins's mindset is the conviction that comfort is the greatest enemy of growth. This block must detail how Goggins identifies and systematically combats any comfort zone, recognizing that stability, safe routines, and the absence of challenges can erode resilience and limit human potential. The narrative must show that Goggins not only avoids comfort, but seeks it strategically to confront it. He deliberately exposes himself to situations of pain, risk, extreme fatigue, and constant adversity, transforming discomfort into a tool for improvement. It is fundamental that the script explores practical examples: ultra-distance races under severe weather conditions, military training with sleep deprivation, grueling physical exercises performed even after hours of accumulated effort, and challenges many would consider impossible, all designed to force the mind and body to operate beyond self-imposed limits. Furthermore, the script must emphasize the psychological dimension of this philosophy. By continuously confronting discomfort, Goggins teaches that pain ceases to be a threat and becomes fuel, while mental resilience strengthens progressively, creating a radically new perception of what is bearable and what is achievable. This block must also connect the concept with discipline, visualization, and the confrontation of pain presented in previous topics, showing that rejection of comfort is the catalyst that transforms training into real transformation. The audience must understand that Goggins's philosophy goes beyond the physical, applying oneself daily, breaking patterns of ease, and challenging the mind to embrace intentional suffering are practices that shape character, courage, and resilience. Finally, this segment must make clear that true growth never occurs in safety, and that every moment of discomfort faced with purpose is an opportunity to expand the limits of the mind, body, and life itself, consolidating Goggins's central message. To achieve extraordinary feats, one must reject comfort, embrace pain, and use every adversity as the foundation for extreme strength. David Goggins did not become a reference in extreme resilience solely because of his personal achievements, but because of the direct impact he exerts on those around him. Through the demonstration of mental strength and unshakable discipline, this block must detail how he transforms personal experiences of suffering and overcoming into tools of inspiration, showing that the most powerful leadership is not imposed by words, but manifested in action and consistency. The narrative must explore how Goggins influences military teams, groups of athletes, followers, and even ordinary people by sharing challenges that exceed conventional limits, demonstrating in practice that facing pain, fatigue, and fear is not only possible, but essential for growth. The script must emphasize that his leadership by example goes beyond mere physical feats. He promotes a philosophy of personal responsibility, encouragement of self-questioning, and the overcoming of mental limitations, reinforcing that each individual is capable of far more than they believe. Concrete examples must be explored. Moments when he led extreme training sessions, endurance challenges, ultramarathons, or difficult missions where his presence, dedication, and resilience inspired colleagues to transcend their own limits. Additionally, the script must highlight the emotional and psychological dimension of Goggins's inspiration. By exposing vulnerabilities, pains overcome, and failures transformed into strength, he creates a genuine connection, motivating others to face their own challenges without excuses or self-pity. It is essential that the viewer perceives that leadership is not just commanding but serving as a model, and that each act of discipline, courage, and resilience by Goggins is a silent lesson in self-determination. This segment must consolidate the understanding that Goggins's philosophy is not limited to individual achievement. It spreads when individuals witness the practical application of his principles and realize that pain, discipline, and perseverance are universal, accessible, and transformative. Finally, this block reinforces that true inspiration does not depend on fleeting motivational words, but on consistency, courage, and concrete action, showing that leading by example is the highest manifestation of resilience and the power of self-discipline that Goggins advocates in his life and methodology. Finally, the story consolidates David Goggins's journey, synthesizing his experience into a life philosophy that transcends physical achievements and becomes a guide for resilience, self-discipline, and continuous overcoming. This segment must show how his story, marked by suffering, extreme discipline, ultramarathons, military challenges, and constant self-confrontation, transforms into a legacy applicable to anyone, regardless of age, physical condition, or life circumstances. The script must explore the essence of his message. There are no definitive limits, only self-imposed barriers, and pain, discomfort, and failures are essential instruments for discovering the real capacity of each individual. It must detail how Goggins inspires millions of people to reflect on their habits, excuses, routines, and especially on the untapped potential within themselves, showing that personal evolution is the result of daily choices, unshakable discipline, and the courage to face adversity. The narrative must emphasize that his legacy is not limited to numbers, medals, or records, but to the creation of a mental model of resistance, perseverance, and personal responsibility that challenges mediocrity and complacency. Furthermore, the script must highlight the practical aspect of this philosophy. Goggins teaches that any goal, no matter how impossible it seems, can be achieved when one masters the mind, records progress, visualizes success, and maintains discipline even in the face of pain. Each stage of his life, from a difficult childhood to his military career and ultra-distance achievements, must be presented as living examples of the consistent application of his principles, consolidating the idea that conscious suffering and self-discipline are paths to radical transformation. Finally, this block must make clear that Goggins's true legacy is to inspire action, generate change, and demonstrate that the power of the human mind is limitless when combined with discipline, courage, and the ability to embrace pain. Closing the script with a message that synthesizes all previous teachings, facing challenges, surpassing limits, and transforming suffering into strength is not just a method, but a life philosophy that anyone can adopt to achieve excellence and personal fulfillment.